Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Welcome to today's Waterside Chat. My guest is Jamie Workman. Jamie has over 25 years of experience in strategic communications for global corporations, agencies, NGOs, and media outlets. He's the author of Heart of Dryness, How the Last Bushman Can Help Us Endure the Coming Age of Permanent Drought, and what we'll talk about today, his book, Sea Change, Unlikely Allies and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions. I'm excited you could join us today. Welcome, Jamie. I look forward to hearing about your passion for natural resources and the aquatic ecosystems.
Me too. Thank you for bringing me on. I was looking forward to this.
Well, so am I. All right, so Jamie, welcome. And so let's do a little background. Who is Jamie Workman? Where were you born? Where are you raised?
Boring childhood with a happy family in the suburbs of Northern California. Born at Stanford University and grew up in Silicon Valley. Child of two school teachers and junior college professor, my dad, and that basically meant that unlike a lot of my friends, I discovered that everybody in the family gets summers off, and so we would use that time on a teacher salary to go backpacking, go camping, and explore a lot of the outdoors.
Wonderful. And where'd you go to high school?
It was Menlo Atherton High School, public high school, pretty big, and I did the soccer and tennis, a little bit of debating and student government and journalism there. But it was a wonderful childhood that I was very smart in choosing the zip code and the parents that I was born into.
I love it. I love it. And where'd you go to college? Or colleges?
I went to Yale. I went back east to college at Yale and rowed on the crew team there, and
the storied Yale.
Yeah, that was a great experience because I thought I was all hot shot, and then I landed up there and realized how utterly mediocre I am. And I did a semester abroad at Oxford, which was fantastic. Just a different way of learning, sort of one-on-one with tutorials instead of the usual lecture halls and big courses, and that was a wonderful experience as well. But that I never got onto advanced degrees, and I married into someone who got those degrees.
Well, picking parents and picking brides is always a good thing to do carefully and well.
I had a little more choice over the latter, but
indeed. So we talked when we were in the green room, we talked a little bit about some of your hobbies. You and I have a hobby in common of fly fishing. What else?
Yep. Well, rowing is one. It gets me out on the water, and it's you're sort of silent in the boat rowing, but you really it's an important thing for coordination, for timing, for interacting with the natural world, and realizing that you go out there, whatever the hell the elements are, snow, frost, sleet, rain, or beautiful mornings like today. It might be a little bit chilly, but and just a good group of guys through college, and then now in middle age, guys that you forge new friendships with that you otherwise might not have anything in common with, but you've been through this ordeal together.
Awesome. Well, I aspired to rowing, never took it up. Fly fishing consumed my time.
Probably a drift boat. You probably rowed in that.
I did row a drift boat. I put the first drift boat on the South Fork of the Shenandoah River when I was guiding over that.
Oh, fantastic.
But what you learn about that is that the ledges on the Shenandoah are notorious chine eaters. And so it looks like after 2 seasons, you've taken a chainsaw to the chines of your drift boat. So
okay.
When I moved down here and started guiding, I I decided to abandon the drift boat and just do wading trips.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
which, as I said in the green room, we'll have you out here next
I
time you're
like
in
that.
DC in the spring. So in the introduction, we talked a little bit about your Bushman world. Talk a little bit with me, if you will, about the interesting aspects of your career that involved busting dams
Yeah,
and
yeah.
smuggling water.
Well, they lead into one another. I got into water, partly just because growing up in California, it's this force larger than any individual, any institution, even the states. And so you start having to think strategically about it. But at a real, passionate level, in the 90s, I was working as a speechwriter and advisor to Secretary of Interior, Bruce Babbitt. And we had an opportunity to help in taking out a few then small dams. And this was, for me, every boy's excitement because we build dams and then we kick them over with our feet. And I was very much of the school that fewer dams means more fish and more life and more continuity. But these wasn't even an environmental issue. It was a safety issue. It was a legacy that these dams had outlived their purpose. And so we were taking them out. And it was extraordinary for me because, fish given half a chance, as you know, they come back fast and they come back hard. And they have this resilience in them. McFerrin Dam out here, other dams, Embry Dam in Virginia there that Senator Warren wanted named after him just right before they could take it out. We started involving the Marines with plastique C4 explosives on some dams in North Carolina, and the shad again would come back, and that was a powerful lesson for me of that all it sort of contradicts one of my heroes, David Brower, that all environmental losses are permanent, all victories are temporary. That these were cases where the dam was a loss to them. You take it out, and nature comes back. And
Mhm.
so I got very, very passionate about that. But then, along the way of getting excited about taking out dams, I had a taxi cab driver, I think he was from Pakistan, said, "Oh, you're going to take out a dam. What will you replace it with?" And it was a simple question and a profound one because you start thinking, as he did from Pakistan, where's the energy going to come from? Where are the benefits going to come from? And that leads you, of course, into efficiency, a very boring topic, but a very important one of how do you get the same values, the same energy and water and rights and justice, without building dams. And that led me overseas initially to the World Commission on Dams, and under Nelson Mandela's patronage and the head of water at South Africa. And we developed what was sort of a rights and risks-based approach to water and dams and how you can have a much more effective way of developing and conserving natural resources at the same time. So I stayed on there and bringing to your other question of like, geez, are there going to be wars over water? We keep wanting more and more and more, and there's a lot of transboundary rivers, transboundary aquifers. Are we going to fight over those? Everyone was saying, oil in the 20th century, water is going to be in the 21st century. And so I got a fellowship with the Institute of Current World Affairs to look at that. And one of the first cases I started examining was where Botswana was using water as a weapon to push the Bushmen of the Kalahari off their ancestral lands, where they'd only lived, for 30,000 years, longer than any human anywhere. And my instinct, of course, was like, no, don't do what we did in America of pushing them out of their homes onto reservations where, they become dependent. And so, I was this Dudley Do-Right. I'm going to go out and I'm going to rescue the Bushmen. I'm going to do that by bringing them water. Because, God, if you're in the Kalahari Desert, that's one thing you need. And I broke down on the way in and finally got going and reached the Bushmen. And, hey, I've got some water for you. And they're like, oh, thanks. And it was equivalent of bringing, coal to Newcastle or ice to Eskimos because they knew where to find water. That was not their issue. They needed just the freedom, they needed the authority, the autonomy. And what I ended up doing is realizing that this sort of top-down, supply-driven approach to water, had to be balanced or offset with what I learned from the Bushmen and from subsequently other local resilient cultures, a system of exchange, of recognizing that, demand side can be controlled if people have, a sense of responsibility, a sense of ownership, a sense of dominion and stewardship, that all go together instead of just like, well, let somebody else supply the water. We'll just use as much as we can as cheaply as possible. And that has stuck with me ever since then. I mean, that was the most profound lesson coming out of that incident in the next several years, where I was spending writing about the Bushmen and their approach and their fight against the government, that turned into, as you said, Heart of Dryness. And I was saying, well, how do we turn that kind of lesson into our so-called modern civilization of cities, of irrigation farms, and one with massive pumps that can lift water from a mile under the earth.
That's a very obviously terrestrial focus. You spent time as a journalist. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was learning to write, learning to discover, what was going on out there. I again, in your neck of the woods, I was a business journalist, and Disney, you may remember Disney's America had plans to open a theme park just outside of Washington, D.C., because they were looking at the demographics.
I know it extremely well because I had property on the other side of those mountains.
Okay. Well, it was, who goes up against Disney? But I was reporting on this and I was showing, their water demands for the summer, there's no supply to meet that. And that was, basically just reporting out the details. And it was the first time where like these three suits from Disney show up, and we were a pretty small news organization, but the editor and publisher called me in, and these gentlemen have some objections to your writing. It's like, oh, did I get the facts wrong? No, but your tone. I mean, you guys are a business. You want business, don't you? And I was just like, well, just tell me about the story. And to their credit, the organization, stood by me, and others, built on this and said, yeah, that's just another example why this isn't appropriate. And Disney, to their credit, backed away. That there was just too much local opposition and pressure, and they hadn't thought it through. But that element of sort of exceeding our appetites for what's available, and just saying, well, bigness is better and jobs above all else. You say, well, what kind of jobs and what kind of resource impacts, and what's the long-term outcome of this? So that helped get the attention of Secretary Babbitt. Became a speechwriter for several years with him, and that's where I got into issues of wildfire and fisheries and dam removals and endangered species. So that was basically my de facto grad school of policy and conservation, biodiversity.
As a journalist myself, I think it's a great grad school.
Yeah,
I think it's a terrific grad school.
He was a scholar and a gentleman, and he's like, I don't have time to read this. You read this, and let's talk about what the implications are. And unlike my time as a journalist, people in official circles returned my calls. There, where like, well, he needs to know this and he needs to know that, and so that was just a wonderful experience.
Awesome. Well, and he's a terrific guy.
Yeah,
I saw him at
he's been a great mentor.
A Bristol Bay event. The last time I saw him was
good
Bay event, so we're now heading in that direction. Two directions here, just so you don't think I'm just rambling here. We're gonna head towards EDF, and then we're gonna head towards aqua shares, and then finally we'll wrap up with talking a little bit about the book. Right. And that's really where I want to focus. But your time at EDF, at least in my estimation here or thinking here, is that that's led you towards where you wound up with the book. But and so if you want to, but you also have a communications business. You also have aqua shares. So fit this in the way
Yeah,
you feel most comfortable, but where I want to wind up is at the book.
yeah.
So,
No, it's a great segue, a great dovetailing because coming back, you write a book, you're really excited about it, and then you wait for something to happen and change, and it doesn't, and you're like, well, okay, let's turn the lessons from the heart of dryness, the lessons of the Bushman. Turns out the lessons of almost every traditional resilient society, from Indonesia and the Balinese water temples to Aflaj and the Oman traditions, to our world. And that led to me starting this idea of aqua shares, of letting people trade the water they save. And if people had an ownership over their water savings, not necessarily the water itself, those credits is something that they could sell. And that would engage them on the sort of the incentive side instead of just, shame and guilt and prices. That if and similarly with groundwater, that if someone who's racing his neighbor farm or industry to pump the last drop of water from under the ground, because it's sort of this free for all, literally a race to the bottom, that if they could own some shares of that, then they would slow down, they would be more efficient, they would think about what they were cropping, what they were growing, whether they could time it so it's only at night instead of during the day, all the kinds of things that environmentalists want them to do, they would be doing purely naked self-interest, whether they had a green bone in their body or not. And it was a slow process because agencies are conservative and cautious and so forth. And so while I was pursuing this, an old colleague, Kate Bonds in Environmental Defense Fund, said, "Hey, look, we're getting overwhelmed. This demand for catch shares is really going up." And I'd heard about it, catch shares. And I said, "Well, that's great. I'd love to, join and help out, but I'm a kind of freshwater guy. I don't know too much about ocean fisheries." Like, "No, Jamie, you've got the concept down because it's what you're trying to do with aqua shares of that incentives-based, rights-based, securely defined share of this invisible resource." And she was right. And so I spent, a couple of years as her deputy, helping design catch shares and laying it out and simplifying the language so that more and more people could understand. And I often joke that after 2 years of them seeing my management skills in action, EDF said that writing a book was what Jamie was cut out for. And I'd been feeling very much the same way. It's just like, this is an extraordinary story, the level of success that's been happening, and it needs to reach a wider audience. It needs to be told outside of the fisheries wonks like yourself and me, and reach people who are having doubts about ever ordering seafood again, or having doubts that they should even go on a recreational fishing ship, or having doubts about whether the ocean is going to survive humanity. And so that set us down that path of how do we tell this story. And Amanda Leland, who is the head of the ocean, she's now the executive director of EDF, said, "I'm going to write this with you," because she really brings the decades of experience on the policy side, the marine Magnuson-Stevens Act reauthorization, modifications, the fisheries councils. And she also brings her marine biology chops, having really, literally immersed herself in what's going on with different fisheries under the ground. And she had this experience with fishermen that said, "Look, I know we're overfishing, but if I don't catch the last fish, someone else will." And that really got her from the marine biology side and saying, "I don't just want to document the loss of the ocean. I want to do something about it, and go from this contentious world into some solutions." And EDF, probably more than any other organization, but certainly not alone, was really championing this rights-based approach to fisheries. So she had basically been my co-author, my corrector, my editor. I had freedom and flexibility to go out and spend time with these different characters like Buddy Gwendon, Scott Hickman, and she would read through what I wrote, and I'd get really excited about how, halibut, they actually have the two eyes normal, and then they land on one side, and then their eye moves over to the other side of their head. And isn't that fascinating? She says, yeah, it's very fascinating, Jamie. It's not going in the book. It's not essential. It's like, oh, okay. So she had that depth of understanding of how do we, keep this lean? How do we keep it moving? And she said, you got to spend some time with Buddy Gwendon, and go down with him, have a few beers. And I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. And not knowing that Buddy Gwendon owned a bar, that he was, this great fighter and can be kind of belligerent and so forth. And I was like, oh, I have a few beers. And so then, the challenge is interviewing him while drinking with him and trying to stay focused enough so that I could still read my notes, later on. But that led into the book, and where we, spent 3-4 years of combining research, storytelling, reporting, interviewing, and trying to weave a coherent narrative arc into this, extraordinary local, national, global story, that would appeal both to, the fisheries managers and wonks and scholars, as well as especially the, seafood eaters and ocean lovers that don't have that kind of background.
So if you were going to introduce the book to people who've never picked up the book, never seen it, I had not seen it, and when we met in Chattanooga, in as short a paragraph as you can, tell us what the book is.
Great. Yeah, it's a book about, honestly, the greatest success story of the environment that no one's heard of. And they haven't heard of it because fisheries is an obscure topic. Most people don't even know what a fishery is. It's this combination of the kind of fish that are being targeted, with the fishermen that go after them, with the processors on shore, and the regulators and the scientists that are, all of that becomes this collective fishery. And it's out of sight, out of mind. And what most people think of is like, what's on the menu? Ooh, halibut. I don't know if I should eat that. Oh, cod. Wasn't there some collapse of that? I should stay. Oh, red snapper, grouper. Yeah, the ocean's overfished and it's got, global warming, and so I'm going to steer clear of these. And so they'll eat beef, or they'll eat chicken, or they'll eat, go vegan. And those choices have huge consequences, both environmentally and socially and, economically. And so what we wanted to do with this book is say, look, there's actually this extraordinary transformation that's happening. You would have been right to be concerned 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even 15 years ago. But since then, there's been this renaissance of fisheries. And here's how it happened. Here's how it took place. It wasn't, we're going to force this on the fishermen against their will. We're going to kick them off, or we're going to make a marine protected area that goes from Alaska down to the Gulf of Mexico and up to Maine. No, we're going to sit down over beers, ideally, with the fishermen as environmentalists, with the scientists, and say, look, you want more fish in the water. You want more food on the plate. You want more income from the fish that you do catch. So how do we get there? And the way to get there is through a combination of matching rights to fish, exclusive, defined, secure rights to a portion of the fish out there, combined with responsibilities that you will have to report what you catch, that you will be transparent, you will have cameras on board, you will put a vessel monitor on your boat so that the whole system knows where you're catching the fish and when and how. And that combination was something that took a long time for fishermen to get comfortable with, and honestly took environmentalists a long time to get comfortable with. But it had started, in 1968 in the Great Lakes, of all places. And in little bits and pieces, it had started scaling up. And each time it revealed this extraordinary success of fishermen flipping 180 degrees, demanding cameras on board, demanding lower limits, reduction in how much they can catch, because they were now not fishing day to day in this, derby, this race for fish to catch the last fish. They were thinking 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in advance. And They were making more money because they were reducing their fuel costs, they were being more efficient on their trips, and they were getting better prices for the fish they caught because they weren't delivering them all in sort of a 2-day, 3-day glut where the guys on shore could say, oh, I'll give you $1 a pound, take it or leave it. They could negotiate better prices. And those fishermen talking with one another, and environmentalists talking with one another, and scientists talking with one another, all started to, recognize, hey, there's something to this. There's some magic element there that builds trust, that builds confidence among people that otherwise, would be hurling insults at one another or lobbying against one another. And so that's the story, and it has implications outside of fisheries where we've been successful in the U.S. To export that kind of model overseas, customized to the fishery there, but also that can be applied to other areas. I've mentioned groundwater, but to biodiversity, to forests, to fire policy, where you build trust at the local level with communities, and you give incentives, and they make some short-term wins, and then you start converting people to start thinking, hey, how do we improve on this? And that's just worked wonders. And the old thing is that good news doesn't really sell newspapers, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing, have been facing even before writing the book. But we're glad people like you are eager to hear that.
Well, when I heard you speak in Chattanooga at the Outdoor Writers, I mean, it clearly, this is the book is a outpouring of personal experience with fishermen. Is there a passage in the book that you would care to share that
Sure.
really is meaningful to you?
It is, because let me try to give it's unexpected, but it's you probably most people have heard, if they think of fisheries at all, it's like, oh, the deadliest catch. The crab fishermen up in Alaska, that wow, that's just dramatic and extraordinary, and what a great reality TV show. But there's a darker and more personal story behind that. And this guy, Arnie Thompson, that I haven't met but had corresponded with, met in person, but he was an extraordinary player in helping that fishery, convert to a catch share system, despite a lot of controversy at a really early time. And so there's this excerpt in recalculated risks that I'll read you about that. Arnie Thompson wrote true accounts of brave men lost in cold waters. He never got paid for his writing, but became a beloved and respected author whose audience was irrevocably moved, perhaps even saved by his words. He wrote for the siblings, the parents, the children of those lost at sea. He wrote for the widows. Such writing wasn't his first choice. He'd been a crabber himself for years and aspired to become a novelist, but he rose to the occasion when in 1981 the writing of obituaries chose him. A crab boat went down, and I knew almost all of them who were on board, he recalled. Some of the guys asked me if I could write a few words, and I said, okay, and I sat down. Well, that turned out to be the first of many memorials I would do. The Bering Sea in winter has never welcomed visitors. For millennia, native Inuit, Aleut, and Inupiat fishers and hunters kept their boats hard to shore during those dark months. Newcomers weren't so prudent. Going out was relatively simple. A guy could pick up a cheap offshore supply boat or an Exxon Valdez oil spill cleanup leftover, retrofit it for pulling crabs off the seafloor, and start to make big money. But then one day the sea might violently heave and claim a thumb crushed by the gear. A surge might sever an arm caught between steel cable and winch. The 70-foot rogue wave might knock over the vessel and swallow it within minutes. For nearly a decade, Thompson wrote about lost lives as if they were inevitable. In some years, Alaska crabbers faced a death rate at least 40 times that of the average U.S. worker. Then one Sunday in 1989, 400 people gathered in Seattle's First Lutheran Church to honor 6 fishermen who had been 70 miles off Kodiak Island trapping Alaska crab when their ship, the Vestfjord, disappeared. Thompson knew a few of the orphans, yet somehow, looking out at their stricken faces of those children, he found both the right words and a new determination to slow this march of funerals and grief. He described how the new captain of the Vestfjord, Dick Laguerre, had fallen in love with Dodie Woodside and become like a father to her 4 children, advising her son to finish school before taking up fishing. He spoke of Kevin Melnick, whose widow Julie sat in the pews holding their 7-month-old son who would never get to know his dad. He shared how the night before the sinking, when Kevin's mother Mary put a candle in the window on a piece of paper with the word Vestfjord written on it, she could not have known. It was just something she always did, end quote. He then asked for a moment of silence, knowing that up in Alaska, crews were at that same moment cutting their engines and falling silent themselves. In the next moment, those men would resume their frenzied race, pitted against all others. It was around that time Thompson began to put the deadly pieces together. He saw how desperate cycle that threatened lives was linked to the decline of the crab fishery. I'll stop there. It's just a way of understanding that this crazy dichotomy of admiring and the camaraderie among fishermen, still had them pitted against one another and pitted against the elements, and it was seen as like inevitable that that's just what we have to do. But it wasn't. It was actually forced by the regulatory system that says we're moving from a year round to 3 months to 3 weeks to, in some cases, 3 days of a season. And each time you compress that season, the fishermen don't just catch, a third less fish, or, they will go all out and they will carry extra traps and they will carry extra gear and they will take chances because they have to. The alternative, as Buddy and others have said, is letting my kids go hungry. So of course I'm going to take risks out there. The happier news is that after Arnie's work, finally paid off and they converted to a catch share system, the first year of the deadliest catch was, again, deadly. 6 people lost, ratings went up. The next year, they'd gone under a catch share system, and the fishermen didn't want to go out during those, the horrible time of year. And so they took less risk. They brought fewer traps. They caught, and made more money. And so it took away some of that, man against the sea, man against each other rivalry. There wasn't this competition anymore, and it's become much safer. There's still risks involved, obviously, but they're not the kind and level of mayhem and loss of life that had existed so far. And that alone is almost a reason to convert to a catch share system, let alone the ecological resilience and recovery, let alone the economic benefits, let alone the social gains that come along with it.
So in listening to that, it's clear that this was a paradigm shift.
That's right.
From the rodeo derby fishery. Everybody goes out. You have to. It's do or die.
Yeah.
Which is not surprising. And until someone offered an alternative, there really wasn't anything else other than let your kids go hungry, which just no responsible adult's going to do that. Right?
Yeah.
That paradigm shift created, and I don't know if the word ethic is as much as maybe it's a outlook, but it seemed to me that you're talking about personal responsibility here. How does that fit into what you found in your book?
Yeah, it's the language of economics is really kind of dismal and boring, but it really was the paradigm shift, and the ethics and the responsibility really came down to incentives. It came down to aligning the public's incentives for, we want more fish in the water, we want a healthier ocean. And then they saw that, but fishermen, they threatened that. And the fishermen actually, no, we want, more fish in the water, a healthier ocean, because I want to pass this down to my children. And Buddy, was just trying to, I'm just going to fish as long as I can, as hard as I can for my family. I don't want my kids going anywhere near this fishery. I just want to get in and try not to sink. and make as much as I can to sort of set them up and put them through college so they can go on to some other profession of, tax accounting or whatever. And so yeah, ethic is, I think, a good word, but it's not just like they have this sort of epiphany. They start thinking, not just day to day, I've got to catch fish today. And under a system where you can only catch, 2,000 pounds each trip, so you make 10 trips. Anything to be either within or on the other side of the law to make do. And then, really changing to thinking like, how do I maximize my share? I, as a fisherman, have been catching 1.3% of the fish out there, whether it's grouper, whether it's halibut, whether it's rockfish, lingcod, and so forth. My 1.3% is something we negotiated. It's based on what I caught in the past. It's based on what can be removed. But that fishery's been depleted by like 70%, or even 90% in some cases. If it increases threefold or tenfold, my 1.3% is going to be worth a lot. And so they're thinking that way. And I was like, how fast can I get that, tenfold increase? It's going to take more than a year, more than 2 years probably, but it's eventually going to get there. And so I'm going to start thinking about what we can do to rebuild the fishery so that my little 1.3%, increases. And so then they start thinking about, I used to hate those marine protected areas because those told me you can't fish, and that's where the fish were. But now I'm looking at those same marine protected areas, those same reserves as a bank account that's just, spilling, that's growing interest, that's driving more. So I actually want that protected, and I want it to expand, and I want it to be integrated with other marine protected areas because that's going to help recover faster than ever. And then they also start thinking, if we took a 30% cut in what we're allowed to catch, that 30% that we don't catch is going to make bigger, faster babies. So yeah, we voluntarily, sign up for less than this, and that happened as well. And the regulators like, wait, you've been fighting us for 30 years, saying we're setting the limit too low, and now you want it even lower? And say, yeah, we do, because that's the paradigm shift. And then they start thinking, well, we used to go after the biggest fish. Whether with nets or with hook and line, because that's where the meat was. But it turns out those bigger fish are the super spawners. They're the big old fat, fertile female, fecund, females. And we want to figure out how to avoid catching them or putting them back, even in some cases, as gently as possible with, avoiding barotrauma, so that they can go spawn, millions or more over the next 10 years. And all of those are just rethinking how you approach the fishing process. Then they also start thinking, well, how do I bring down my costs? Well, one of my biggest costs is fuel. If I don't have to go out as fast, if I don't have to fish as hard and as far away from the shore as I did before, I'm going to cut my fuel savings. And Buddy Gwendon did that, reduced his fuel costs and therefore his emissions by 80%. It wasn't unique to the Gulf of Mexico or Buddy. Trawlers along the West Coast started, lifting their trawls off the seafloor. And so they were using much less fuel as well. And they weren't damaging the habitat that they wanted to recover as fast as possible. And, you have then the environmentalists saying, well, we don't have a whole lot to, complain about. And they're asking us, what else can we do to help the fishery recover? And so you turn from this adversarial to a symbiotic relationship where the scientists, instead of like being the enemy because they were just taking surveys out there and saying, "Yep, you're catching too many fish, we're going to lower the limit," they started going out with the scientists and saying, well, what made you put your transect along here? And are you sure you're not overestimating how many fish are out there? And maybe we can do some experiments. This was a great one for me. Longliners for grouper, they'd been doing this for decades, spooling out a huge line. And the challenge there, of course, for Marine Fish Conservation Network is the bycatch. You'd get sharks, you'd get dolphins, you'd get other turtles biting onto these hooks and drowning. And that's a horrible loss. It's also a horrible waste for the fishermen. And so one of the questions they wanted to explore is like, well, how long should you leave a long line in the water? And this is, a question every recreational fisherman wonders as well. How long do you leave it out there before checking on the bait? But think of that with like a commercial level where you've got hundreds of baited hooks spooled out. And they put these hook timers on, and they found that, there was optimal time of soak time, they call it, of like 27 minutes. And that was, you catch the most fish then and avoid, the kind of bycatch that comes in later. And that became a new standard. And it was only possible because of this new level of trust between scientists and fishermen. And so, yeah, it was fascinating for me, and each chapter kind of focuses on the marine protected areas, the science, the working with environmentalists, working with regulators. We don't want them to know where we're fishing. If I ask you, hey, Tom, where do you catch the most fish in the Shenandoah? You'd be like, yeah, let's change the subject, Jamie, because that's your unique spot. But if you knew that no one else could catch your fish in that spot, you would be more generous, presumably, about sharing techniques. And that happened as well. The fishermen started sharing their data with one another and with those on shore, and coming up with some extraordinary new outcomes that added to the marine protected areas, or that brought citizen science to bear on the regulations.
You mentioned stewardship, and it leads me, and I want you to tell me either this makes sense or I'm reading it wrong, or maybe expand on it, is you use stewardship and investment in the same kind of part of that conversation. Yeah. And it seems to me that the book helps us understand that relationship, that if you're going to be a commercial fisherman or even a recreational fisherman, and I think we see this dramatically in the fly fishing world, in the fly fishing industry, it's a touchstone ethic.
Yeah.
Of being conservationist, because it's builds our future.
Yeah.
Expand on like that by being good stewards, you're investing in your business, as opposed to I don't want to get it. Well, you're a business journalist. I can do this, right?
Yeah.
On your balance sheet, right? If you look and say, well, I should catch all the fish I possibly can as fast as I possibly can and not worry about it because it's general. Whereas if I catch less, I can catch more longer. Is that fill in there where
you can time when you fish is an important distinction there. That if there's like for a fly fisherman on the Yellowstone River, it was a river runs through it. Iconic story. Envy the writing capacity of Norman Maclean, and the story is so beautifully told. These were meat fishermen. They weren't catch and release. There was no clear line in their line between fly fishing and protein provision for their mom's skillet. And that is how saltwater recreation very much is still conceived today. And yet, some point over the last century, since Norman Maclean's era, now it breaks somebody's heart to take a rock to a brook trout that is caught in a western rainbow trout river and so forth, and that reflects stewardship and a big change that has happened there, where people recognized the finite limits, and it didn't just happen overnight, and it wasn't an easy process. It wasn't simple or clear. It was really messy, really contentious, led to a lot of fights, physical and lobbying otherwise. Especially like in the 60s and 70s, where people were said, hey, not only do you have a daily limit of 12, but you really shouldn't even catch that. You should put them back, and here's how, and here's why. And you've been a fishing guide, right, Tom? So
Yeah.
the fishing guys in the 60s and 70s were instrumental to this because they were like, "Oh, I'm gonna lose clients if I say they can't take home their fish." But the same guides were also thinking, "Hang on a sec. If I'm thinking long term with this business, because I love what I do, I want to be doing it for the next 20, 30 years, I want to pass it down to my kid. I really need to ease my clients into this catch and release ethic
Right.
mentality and clip the barbs off the hooks and show them that the real joy is in the catching and that a prize, trout or steelhead shouldn't be caught just once. That it's just too important for that. And that went from sort of this is crazy to, yeah, this is the norm over the course of a decade or two. So it's not a quick process, but once you cross over that line, then the places where these guides have established business, where the rivers are healthy, start setting an example for other rivers around the world, around the country, to say, how do we get that same kind of ethic put in place there? That it's not, I will do this even though it's against my self-interest, but I will do this because it's in my self-interest. That I want to make more money and I want to make it over a longer time. And I want to take clients out 365 days a year, if possible, if the river's not frozen, instead of just like 2 weeks of the year concentrated on a river with 30 other guys entangling our lines. I say that at length because we're going through a similar kind of, angler ethic offshore with guys that now, can go out and fish for red snapper and catch it within the first, catch their limit within the first 20 minutes. And then what do? Do you just put them in your ice box and say, oh, well, I guess we'll just sit out here for the next 7 hours. We'll go back to shore. The whole experience would be lost in the kind of bonding, the camaraderie, the mystery and wonder of catching these fish. And so they're moving towards, no, we're going to bring needles on board. We're going to have these descender devices, avoid barotrauma, and it'll be the experience of fishing. And that's from, private anglers and head boats, and it starts to spread out in many ways through guys like yourself. The irony is that example has been set by commercial fishermen, that they said we were trying to catch as much fish as fast as possible, and now we're spreading that out. We're reducing what we can catch because it's in our self-interest, because we now have a secure share of that fish that's out there. Our 1.3, I keep coming back to that example, that percent of the fish is going to be worth more, and I can negotiate onshore with restaurants and markets for the price that I want to go out and fish for in advance of going out and catching them, because I know it's going to be there. It's not a random hunter-gatherer kind of experience. I know how much fish is out there that I can catch, and I know how long it's going to take me to catch it. And if the price is right and I'm reducing my fuel costs, boy, I'm going to make a lot of money. And so that's the extraordinary thing of people eating seafood guilt-free, of fishermen now wanting to track and show the transparency of where they caught something right up to when it's eaten in a restaurant. And so putting these, tags and the transparency of following a fish up the supply chain, the food chain, to its destination at restaurants or markets, has set an example not just for other fisheries, but honestly for other sources of protein. You don't get that kind of level of transparency when you order a pound of pork or a hamburger. You never know where that's coming from, but you do that with a snapper or a lot of wild seafood now caught in the U.S. 94% of species are no longer overfished in the U.S. It's a wonderful hallmark, but it also means we can eat more and drive up the demand for that kind of accountability.
It's a fascinating, and I'm cognizant of the time, but
Oh, sorry.
no, it's me. But I'm thinking here, as you say that, it's like, I don't know where my steaks come from in the restaurant. And do I want to know that? Yeah. I mean, John Tester has made me want to know that. And so it's an interesting where that whole sourcing mindset ethic is beginning to come into the terrestrial side. So I want to go two places real quick.
Yeah.
One, sort of what surprised you the most about the book, and then I want to make sure that we get to a place where we know where you can get the book, right?
Okay. Okay.
So let's. But what surprised you? I mean, it's a fascinating book, and it's not a study book. It's a
Yeah.
story book.
Yeah.
Buddy and the people in the story. So what was the most surprising thing about it?
It'll sound crazy, but some of the surprises to me were the technology that evolved out of nowhere. I mean, you have fisheries hadn't been changing a whole lot in 400 years. You had trawlers dragging, you had hook and line fishermen, and then I mentioned the hook timers, but trawlers now put cameras on their gear. They started changing the weave of the nets to create less friction, to be more selective. And they started having ways of releasing the wrong kinds of fish that they didn't want to catch. And this has happened in a really, really short period of time. And it just shows that once you do have the incentives aligned, technology really, really cracks on. And so that fishermen knew what was going on, what had been a mystery for them. They're just like, well, we drag it and we look and see what's in there and so forth. They know all that now. And the other one I think I mentioned along the West Coast is the fishermen saying, okay, here's our data. What have you got? And well, we don't, these are some overfished species. We want to avoid that. And then they made this extraordinary agreement with regulators on shore and scientists and environmentalists to say, look, we just want to catch fish in this muddy area offshore here. This other huge, thousands of square miles of sensitive habitat, we don't want to go there anymore. So make that a rockfish conservation area. And this is never going to make headlines as the largest MPA on Earth or whatever, but it's up there. And it's a de facto MPA that's negotiated by and of and for the fishermen and the environmentalists and the scientists together. So those were some of the extraordinary, to me, surprises along the way. That the technology breakthroughs once you have that level of trust. And the improvements of how fast, going back to our earlier conversation about dam removal, how fast these species can recover once they're given that chance. Some that weren't supposed to recover for till 2035 came back within 3 years under this different kind of pressure. The biomass has been booming for red snapper. The other surprise is that the fishermen have now done their part on the supply side. And part of the reason why we wrote this book is that we now need to do our part of the bargain on the demand side. We need to actually start ordering fresh, local, wild seafood from American fisheries instead of like importing tilapia or shrimp from Vietnam and so forth, or I'm going to tofu or something like that, because it really there is almost too many fish in the sea at this stage, and they need to be caught, and they need to keep a viable, healthy fishery going. And I think the last surprise has been, and this gets a little into the technology, was the level of animosity between commercial and some recreational fishermen at the policy level, at the national level, that there's a lot of bad blood there over the years of each side sort of not trusting the other, wanting the other to go away. And the longest chapter in the book is, focuses on Scott Hickman, Buddy Gwendon, that saw each other as sort of, the pirate or the bad guy or whatever, and who are now business partners that are working together because of catch shares, because they can start seeing what lessons you have there in terms of transparency, of accountability, of recovery is something we want as guides, as recreational fishermen. And it's still trickling through to a lot of the private angler associations, and I won't name them and so forth, but they're starting to see that they can't just take more and ignore the responsibility side, that any right comes with its equal and and proportionate level of responsibility.
Couldn't say it better than that. So, I could geek out on this stuff for hours.
Yeah,
when we
you can tell
talked
for me.
in the green room, I said we need to keep some of this excitement for the live
Yeah,
for the
yeah,
show. Two things. One, this is an area for the Marine Fish Conservation Network that is fundamental to us, and we began to touch on some subjects here, the culinary community, the supply side. I'm going to want to get you back as we move forward in this year
yeah, I'd love that. Yeah,
and just maybe talk about some specific parts of that. But in the meantime, I want more people to read your book and to get to know Jamie Workman. So, how do they do that? How do they get the book? What's the easiest way for them to get the book? And
yeah,
then, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you
yeah.
to,
No,
if they
thank you.
want to have you come and enlighten them as well as
I'd
you've
love,
done?
I mean, as you said, we could geek out, and there's such a spectrum of areas to focus on, of trust, of accountability, of governance, of the ecosystems, there's different ways to focus. But yeah, the easiest is always not necessarily the best, but it's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, they're carrying it. And that's an easy way to get it. I would still push for, if you have a local bookstore, ask them for it and say you'd like that, and they will order it. So it's available wherever books are sold. The easiest way is, again, through Amazon, clicking through. There's several titles that have sea change in them. If you just focus on fisheries, Workman, Leland, catch shares, that will bring you to the sea change unlikely alliance, and a success story of oceanic proportions. The publisher Torrey House Press is based in Utah. This is their first venture offshore. They focused on the relationship with hunters and ranchers and farmers on the land and Native Americans. This is their first venture offshore after more than a decade of publications. So they have it available there as well. But yeah, the bookstore first, order it through them. Amazon if you need it really quick. And they have we don't have an Audible version yet, but that's coming for a kind of what we used to call books on tape.
Yep.
And there's the e-version, of course, that's available on Kindle as well. I have a website, jamesworkman.com, and that talks about these books and my speaking, my teaching, my little bit of consulting that I do here and there, of this. I think I call it like owning the wild, of which seems like a contradiction, but very much gets at the essence of how humans have related to the natural world for thousands of years, whether it's Bushmen, whether it's Native Americans, of saying, look, I earned this by going out and harvesting it, and whether it's water, whether it's forest resources, whether it's fish, and then truck barter and exchange it, has been happening for thousands of years, and we just need to have that sense of responsibility on our own to say this is my secure exclusive access, and that brings back extraordinary outcomes.
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thank you for being here. As I
Thank you.
said, we're going to want to get you back because there's so much more substance in what you're working on and what you're talking about.
That's good to hear.
So I'm going to pause there. If there's any final words.
No, I mean, one of the questions a lot of people have is like, well, isn't you doesn't just trust the market? I know carbon credits, I don't trust them, and so forth. And the difference is accountability, local communities, whether it's water or fisheries. You now have that kind of understanding of this isn't deregulation. It's a different kind of accountability and policy and regulation, and it's working. And there's lessons that the carbon world, the climate change world, could learn from fisheries about building this resilience. It's not a panacea, it doesn't make microplastics go away or stormwater runoff or acidification, coral bleaching,
but it makes those fisheries and the fishermen that depend on them and all of us who eat seafood that much more resilient to the kinds of changes that are already underway.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to hearing more. Our next Waterside Chat is in the works, and we will be sharing this one. We'll have show notes. We'll be sharing it on our social media channels. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you again. And
thank you.
Have a great day.
Tom, thank you. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.